From the EPR Creations Studio, this is Jason Staples, bringing you Unconquered with Doc Staples. As always, this podcast brought to you by EPR Creations, bringing you the best of internet marketing and website development for an affordable price, by Louis Marquez of Keller Williams Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, by Shenandoah Realty in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, and by Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida. All right. So I've gone through the game again, the Boston College game again, in significantly more detail than I was able to on that first live watch, after which I did my hot takes. And, there's always room for revision after the hot takes, which I think there were some things that I didn't notice or didn't see as well on that first time through. But some things definitely, I haven't changed my opinion on some stuff. I think some stuff got clear, particularly on the defensive side, on the more detailed watches, just with what some of those busts were. And I actually did the first film session breakdown via Patreon that I've done in quite a long time, going through the various defensive breakdowns that they had on long yardage, giving up all those big plays, most of the time on second and third and long, and looking at what they did. So a few conclusions on that. And by the way, there's one of those where I'm still not sure. I think actually I say on the video that they're probably in quarters. I've watched it probably 5 more times since recording it, and looks like they might be rotating to a middle field close to a 3 look. Match 3 look, which, they were in a lot of match 3 this game. So may have gotten that wrong on the one thing. Doesn't actually materially impact the analysis because of how that actually worked in terms of what actually happened. But worth noting, sometimes it's hard to tell unless you actually have the call sheet. And whereas for some years I actually had the call sheet, I no longer have access to that. So I'm doing the best I can to figure that out by looking at what I have. So anyway, so a few things that really stood out. Number one is I think Boston College had a really, really good plan for this game. That stood out much more on my secondary analysis, and more on the offensive game plan, Boston College's offensive game plan to face Florida State's defense than anything. I mean, they had a really, really good plan. They ran a lot of stuff that they had not yet shown. I mean, I'd watched their previous stuff, and they didn't do a number of the things that they did that they showed against Florida State. They came out, and this was, as I said in the pregame analysis, in the prediction stuff, and all of that, that this would be a kitchen sink game for them, and that they're a well coached team. Well, aside from the penalties, they're a well coached team. Well, they did that, and they did a lot of things to isolate players that aren't always the best at diagnosis for Florida State. They went after some vulnerabilities that are there on this defense. First and foremost, at safety and at linebacker. They really didn't test the corners all that much, and they mostly neutralized the defensive line with extra blockers, essentially. And the thing is, they also are really good inside. I mean, Mahogany's, he's an NFL player at guard, and he had his way on the interior. And frankly, it looked like they out-physicaled Florida State up front, which is remarkable because LSU sure didn't. So it gives you, something to think about in terms of Boston College up front. But anyway, so some of the stuff that they did, and again, I'll defer you to the video itself. But some of the stuff that they did, the main stuff, is that they used some quad formation, and then they would actually, have the back go to the quad side. So they'd have 5 guys to one side, and they'd go unbalanced with one guy that was ineligible. And they'd actually have the 2 outside wide receivers. The second guy was ineligible, but still lined up out wide. And they did this to essentially create numbers on the backside for the quarterback running game. And initially that created a lot of confusion through the whole first half. Basically, that created a lot of confusion for the FSU defense, who just didn't fit this very well. And what that was taking advantage of is that backside backer, who is essentially left alone to what's a true nub side. There's not even a tight end over there. You have just a center and then two, then your guard and your tackle on that side. You still have to have three defenders handle the front work for that. And what kept happening is the backer was basically, his eyes were bad because he was following over to the 5 receiver side. But the thing you have to know as a defense is one of those guys has to be ineligible, which means that backer is not in play there. He can just lock in on the run support. But they kept covering the number 2 guy out there, and he wasn't eligible. So now BC did eventually get called on it for a ineligible downfield when that number 2 receiver wandered upfield a little bit. But yeah, that caused some confusion for the linebackers. That caused some confusion for the safeties, and they found ways to put the safeties in some binds as well. Another thing is that without Dent on the field, and I'd stated this previously, the concerns about Kevin Knowles at the safety position, I think, manifested pretty heavily in this one. He had a rough game. He had a rough outing. Couple of plays. If he just makes the play, you're off the field with a tackle for loss, no problem. And it turns into a 30 or 40 yard gain because he just doesn't make the play. And yeah, I think you're going to have to really strongly consider if Dent's not back out there, I think you really have to consider giving a guy like Hussey, who's a really smart guy, giving him a look, maybe even as early as Clemson. And certainly after the bye week. Now, the hope is, if you've got Dent out there, then, that helps solve some of that. Though, I mean, Dent has not been as good as what, I think anybody would hope the last couple of years, given his overall talent level. But he's been a whole lot better than what we saw from Knowles out there. I didn't think Shaheem Brown had his best outing either, although it was just generally quiet. He didn't just have a bunch of busts and miss a bunch of plays. He's just quiet and really didn't do anything there. But they took advantage of Knowles multiple times. They're going to have to figure that one out. Both of the backers also, with what they kept doing, they would use jet motion. They would use a lot of outside zone play action with some boot coming off of it. And the backers just were flat out too aggressive. They just over pursued against the run at times, and just very poor eye discipline at times and actually not just at times, pretty much the whole game, from all of the linebackers not named Tatum Bethune. And they've got to figure out how they can get better eye discipline from that position. I mean, you got guys that are veterans here. You can't let that happen. And I really don't know what you do at this point if guys are just not fully buying into the whole eye discipline thing. But they've got to play with much better eye discipline. I mean, Clemson's going to give them all sorts of eye candy to, pull their eyes over here while everything's actually going back over here. They're going to have to be really disciplined with their eyes this week, or you're going to see a lot of the same problems. I did think they did a little more edge blitzing than I noticed on the live watch. A couple of them actually were Knowles coming down on the edge blitz from the field safety position and just blowing it. So, I did criticize that. I thought they needed to field blitz and edge blitz a little bit more. Maybe some of it is just you don't edge blitz with that guy. You need to edge blitz with somebody else. And, that's a factor. But I still think one thing I'm going to stand on, I still think they use the spy too much. I don't like how they use the spy. I think, my take on this, just defensively, my philosophy on this, especially given what Florida State's personnel is and how they've executed this in the recent years, is leave the spy stuff for the movies and just play your defense and don't mess with it. I mean, one of the downsides of doing all the spy stuff that they're doing is it essentially, and I guess, let me back up. My complaint about the spy stuff is both about their execution of it and just in terms of the philosophy of it. I don't like having a player who is essentially shadowing or mirroring a quarterback 5 yards from the line of scrimmage or 4 yards from the line of scrimmage. Because essentially he's in no man's land. He's doing no good in terms of downfield coverage. If you have him drop to 10 yards, at least he's taking away some of that intermediate stuff over the middle. And then he can come downhill to the quarterback all he wants. So just play him as a rat. Just have him drop, let him play as a rat and drop under, and tell him that his primary stuff is dropping under those short and intermediate crossers. Let him play there as a rat. And then if the quarterback escapes, then he's trying to chase the quarterback from depth. That's my approach if you're going to do any of that. What I don't like to see, and if you go back and you watch the LSU game, I said this in the Hot Takes podcast, go back and watch Perkins in the LSU game, and you see him 4 yards off the line of scrimmage, just shadowing Jordan Travis, and he's just standing there, and he does nothing for the defense. Essentially, Jordan Travis, just by the thread of his legs, and because they're using their best player as a spy, essentially they've just said, okay, well, you can have our best player and completely neutralize him here. That doesn't do you any good. And then if you have backers that do a terrible job actually choosing their angles and, easily getting blocked in that spy role because they're not coming from depth, it makes it worse. And then if you're doing some of the other stuff that they did, I mean, there's at least one where they stunted Patrick Payton and they put him in the spy position over where the center had been. They sort of stunted him back, and then they had him as that extra spy there. Why? He's not doing anything there either. Instead, have him run the big loop. Fine. Have him loop fully around the other two players and then come downhill down in that A gap. And if your other players are rushing in their lanes correctly, then at least he's causing some difficulty for the quarterback as he, breathes down his neck and that length gets up close. If he's just bouncing on his feet, 2 yards past the line of scrimmage, he's doing nothing. You've essentially taken him out of the play. I hate it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it anymore. It drives me crazy. And there were too many of those. But like I said, they did do some of the edge rush stuff and some of the, fire zone type stuff that I wanted to see. I just want to see them do it more. And I want to see none of the spy stuff that they do. I just don't like the way they coach it. I don't like the way it's run. And I think I think Florida State's personnel does it really poorly. And even if you've got a Harold Perkins, I think it's a waste of your personnel. Just play the defense. And if you want that kind of thing, use him as a rat. This is that that player who does not have a distinct coverage responsibility and can kind of float in that area, dropping back from that backer spot. Let him be in that zone, 10 yards off, rather than playing close to the line of scrimmage as a spy. I hate that stuff. I also hate the mush rushing, and there was too much of that. A little bit less than I remembered, but still too much. Get after the quarterback. Let your athletes clean it up. If the guy breaks past your athletes on the defensive line, let your athletes clean it up from range and keep it from turning into big plays. But you just can't not get pressure against guys that are less, especially against guys that are less experienced. So I do think, they did run a bunch of match 3 and middle of the field close stuff. And to me, if you're going to do that, don't use the extra guy as a spy. Don't let him bounce around the line of scrimmage. Use him to get downhill and get at the quarterback. And you're at least using all 11 players. And my impression was that there were times where they were only using 10. So, yeah. Next thing, looking at the offense. This one thing that was confirmed on my second watch and more replay oriented watch was that they definitely ran a lot more zone in this game. So a lot more split zone, they ran actually a couple outside zones, doing a little bit more. And I do think that's helpful for Benson. I think that's something that he's a little more natural doing, but I don't think he's really seeing everything right now. And that also is an issue in the running game because he's leaving yards on the field. And I think I said that in hot takes. And I think that's something that the second watch reinforced as well. I really want to see Hill, and I think Keziah Holmes also probably should get more of a look here coming up, as they really need to have a complementary back who can help I still think Benson is really actually better as a complementary back once the other backs are starting to get rolling, and then Benson can come on and finish things. I really think that's his best role, and I think they need to really seriously consider that. Hard part about that is selling it, and so much right now. You've got so many mouths to feed, and so many guys that you want to keep happy, and guys that you recruited back from the NFL, that sort of thing. That you're gonna have to make some unpopular decisions, I think, as a coaching staff to determine who needs to be in what roles. And some guys might not like the roles that they're diminished to in certain cases, or that the feature role that they were hoping to have is a little bit less. But I think that's what you got to do. Now, I do think also, watching this over and over again, I think a lot of the running game right now, without the dash element from the quarterback, I say dash, that's the call for all of Florida State's runs, can be made into a read play where the quarterback has an option to pull. Pretty much everything right now is, with a couple very rare exceptions, against these teams. Florida State's taking the same approach Clemson did when they had Deshaun Watson and the Elf, is they would run the football, just standard running the football until they got to the big games, and then they'd run their 11-man stuff and they'd add the quarterback run element. Mike Norvell's doing the same thing. So right now, they're running all this stuff without the dash call, without the dash tag added on that allows Jordan Travis to pull it. So essentially it's just, inside zone without inside zone read, or power without it being power read. There's a variety of different things that you can do off of that I think will open up the running game a good bit more. So against Clemson, I fully expect to see those turn into options. And there were a number of plays against Boston College where they didn't really respect Jordan Travis on the backside. They knew he wasn't going to keep it. And so they're collapsing down from that edge. Well, if Clemson does that, Travis will keep it, and you're going to look at a 30-yard run, 40-yard run. That's the way that's going to work. So that's something else to consider, is that their running game right now, they're running the ball without the quarterback run threat because they just don't want to have him out and running a bunch for obvious reasons. So I do think that as they add that element in games where, in bigger games, or in games where they're more threatened, I think that'll open things up a good bit. Now you might ask, like, look, they only won by 2 in this game. Why wouldn't they do it? Well, they were up by 21. It was 31-10. There's really there was not a time in this game where, up until the last 2 drives, where you look at it and you're like, oh man, they got it. They could get beat here. By the time you got to halftime, it was like, okay, Florida State's starting to impose their will. You got to middle of the third quarter and it's like, okay, this game's over. And then it wasn't. So yeah, it makes sense that they would take that approach. But against Clemson, I expect to see quarterback run game as an important element from quarter one. That's what you're going to see. And that'll help open up some things for Benson and others on the front end, because all of a sudden some of the cutbacks that aren't there right now, those are there after a couple quarterback runs. So, and if they're not there, then the quarterback run is going to be there. So I think they're going to get that. Note that the fumble by Toafili, that play actually probably scores. It's probably a 90-yard touchdown if Keon Coleman makes the block correctly on the edge there. Now, so as a former receiver, I'm going to give Coleman the benefit of the doubt here on what he was thinking. I've seen some people that have called into question his effort there on that play, that he just didn't want to block. And I think actually what happened is he expected that if he took the outside release there, that the corner would run with him, and that the corner he'd be able to run off the corner. And you do this a good bit as a wide receiver. Against certain coverages, it's actually more effective to run the guy off than to try to block him. And it's certainly, easier at times. And what it looked like to me is he's trying to take the forced outside release just to get the guy's head turned and get him chasing him. And the ball got out just a little bit too early, and the corner's reading it and looking back at the quarterback and never got turned. And so, he made a bad call, It should have been a block all the way, but I think that's what he was thinking. And you can see as soon as the corner starts coming downhill, you can see Keon Coleman kind of holding his hand up like, oh, dang it. Like, missed it. And then, of course, that's the guy that gets a clean hit on the ball and turns into a scoop and score. But that's how close that game was to being just flat out over. That goes for 90. That game's over right there. That goes for even 40 or 50. That game's over. Turns into a scoop and score. All of a sudden, game on, right? So very different. A few other things here. In terms of the overall flow of the offense, honestly, I would like to see a lot more Marquise Douglas when they're in their 12 packages, when they're in the too tight stuff. I think he's just a much better blocker than what you've got out there. And he, if you're going to have guys out there right now, I think they need to be really good at what they do. And Marquise Douglas is pretty good at one thing, and that's blocking. And he's not nothing as a receiver. I think he's pretty versatile. I mean, he's shown that. To me, I'd like to see him out there more in your 12 packages, especially toward the middle of the field when you're trying to run the football. And I'd like to see more Destin Hill. I've seen enough of him at the slot receiver position, and you keep seeing him pop open. When the angles are open enough, or if you're looking at the all 22, you see him pop open enough to be able to say, he's gonna eventually make some plays. So, and also Winston Wright, get him out there as well. I'd like to see those guys in there just a little bit more in place of Morlock. Now, Morlock, I think you use Morlock more in the red zone type situations where I think his mismatch ability becomes a bigger factor. But I don't think you're maximizing your offense with him and Jaheim Bell out there together as much as what you'd hoped. Just because you're not as balanced as you'd like to be. And I think if you're going to run a lot of 12, you're going to be more balanced and actually more of a threat if Marquise Douglas is the second tight end a good bit more. But, we'll see what they do there. So I think you're going to get more big plays in the running game and all that from those guys. I think you're going to get more big plays. I think Destin Hill is more of a problem in terms of a big play threat at the slot receiver position than Morlock is as a tight end or H-back. So again, I think that's something else that they're going to have to consider. I also think, the offense has bogged down a little bit, partly because I don't think Jordan Travis is, first of all, I don't think he's seeing things especially well. He missed some guys in this game. He missed some guys in terms of immediate reads. A couple times when he could have gone to Keon Coleman underneath and he didn't. A couple times when he, it's an immediate to the back throw, and don't force it downfield when you're not gonna go broke here. Just get it to the back or get it to your tight end or whoever, and win taking a profit. There's too many of those right now where, and it's understandable. I mean, he's trying to force the ball downfield to Johnny and Keon in many of these cases, most of these cases. And it's understandable that you want to get the ball to those guys, but I do think he needs to play within himself more, get the ball out more quickly, and just go through his basic reads. And I don't think he's the same player when his legs aren't involved either. I mean, I think, he becomes a different quarterback to have to defend when his legs become more of a threat. So I do think that's another factor. But I also don't think he's locating the ball especially well. He's not throwing it well. So, he's had some pretty bad misses. He had the one miss where, it's a third down and he takes the vertical option on the back shoulder to Johnny. It's just a bad throw. I mean, I don't actually mind that decision. You've got the first down at the back and the flat if you want it. It's probably the right call. I mean, that's where I'd want him to throw as the quarterback. But I understand you feel like that's an 80-20 with Johnny. Okay, well, just locate it. But he didn't locate it. It was a poor throw. You got the post route that he just airmailed for Johnny. I mean, there's been a few of these. The what should have been an interference on the fade route to Keon Coleman. Another throw that just was not in the right spot. It's just missing his locations. And, to some degree, I hate to say, but I've said this for a while. I mean, I've broken this down. I haven't done the full video analysis of it, but one of these days I probably should. I'm not really a fan of how they've actually coached the throwing motion. They kind of coach him to really pull across the body with the arm. So kind of throw that for the right hander, that left shoulder open and really kind of come across and pull down and through the ball. That's biomechanically an inefficient way to throw it. And typically you're going to get balls that are going to sail. They're going to go a little high. And then other times you're going to get balls that are going to float a little bit out of that, because that's what you call slashing. And they're kind of coaching guys to slash a little bit instead of extending the arm down the field. And I want to see extension. There's an old saying that people who know how to coach throwing really well will say to their quarterbacks on this, and that's out, not down. Out, not down. You want to extend down the field and not pull the arm down or across. The arm is eventually just gravity is going to take the arm down and across, but it's after the arm has fully extended down the field. And Travis at times is not getting full extension. And when you don't get full extension, that's when you see that ball float. You're going to see the ball sail. And he's getting both of those right now. He needs to tighten it up, needs to get that arm extending down the field to the target. And I just don't think they work on that very well. But that's my my view as a guy who's been I've coached throwers a lot. I've been a private quarterback coach. So, that's my particular philosophy, and there are different ways of thinking about this, but I think mine's right. Okay. So now we get to some final thoughts for this. I think after taking a closer look at this, I would consider this a true trap game in a lot of ways. For one, I do think Florida State came into this game determined to work on specific things and not really having a bunch of wrinkles ready to roll to do anything cute in this game in terms of the offensive side, especially. But they're basically just trying to run their base stuff, and then a few things that they felt like they needed to work on, especially some of the zone run stuff. I think that's just basically how they came into it. Not going to use Jordan's legs, not going to do too much, in terms of the passing game, just going to keep working on this stuff. And also try to spread the ball to the guys that need to touch it to be happy. And I do think the offense, and I've said this now for a couple weeks, I do think the offense has kind of looked like they're trying to keep a lot of guys happy. And I said this in the offseason, like, look, you got a lot of mouths to feed and a lot of guys that you brought in who, need to touch the rock. How are you going to keep all those guys happy? Winning helps, but it does get tricky because sometimes you just have to, the matchups dictate that you go here, or the reads dictate that you go here. And this guy's just not going to touch it very much. And, Keon Coleman had one touch plus the punt catches on Saturday. I mean, he can't be happy about that, although he had some opportunities and the one, uncalled pass interference among them. But, I think right now that's part of the reason that the offense is not as cohesive. It doesn't feel as cohesive where one thing's building on another as it might, because it's like, oh, it's Jaheim's turn to touch the ball. Oh, we got to make sure we get, Benson his carries here. And, oh yeah, we got to make sure we get Johnny the ball, this many times. Although I said in the pregame that I would have force fed Johnny the ball early in the game. So, in that sense, I actually agreed with that part. Oh, it's time to make sure Morlock gets his, and, et cetera. So, I think that's something that, especially in these big games, you're going to have to treat it a little bit differently. And I do think that they will. I mean, you saw in the LSU game, I didn't get that feeling the same way. I think they were very much like, okay, here's the reads. Let's go down and, we got this mismatch, keep going to it. That sort of thing. But beyond that, I do think they got out prepared by a coaching staff that treated this as a kitchen sink game rather than as as something like a glorified scrimmage. And then, they physically overwhelmed that team in the middle part of the game. And then they just didn't finish. They didn't finish because of a variety of fundamental and preparatory breakdowns. So I do think, by the way, that that a lot of guys out there were sick. If you looked at some of these guys' performances, week over week, I think there's good reason to think that not all those guys were healthy out there. And you can kind of isolate specific guys in particular, like that guy just doesn't look like himself. There were a number of those guys. And again, one of the other main takeaways here is I think Jordan Travis has to play within the offense first and foremost, and really trust his eyes and trust his arm, and just do things the way that he knows to do them. And also, the offense changes when his legs get involved. So those are the main takeaways, coming out of that game. Just summarizing the main stuff, along with a lot of the defensive stuff in terms of, I think there need to be some solutions at the safety position, and they're going to have to get some things cleaned up with eye discipline at linebacker in particular. But in general, they just need to clean stuff up on defense and scrap anything that has spy in it on the defensive side, as far as my take on this. All right. All that said, we are now going to get into the mailbag portion of this. We've got a few that I've been holding on to here. One couple that came in late, and then a couple that were there game day. So go ahead and go through these. Merrill writes, does Dugans need to take the wide receiver room and have an extensive walkthrough of how to make it look like a natural rub? So this was shortly after the Morlock conversion where Keon Coleman got called for offensive pass interference. Thing is, on that one, and I put this up on Twitter or X right after it happened, that actually wasn't Keon Coleman's fault. That was really on Morlock, because that's a slip screen, and that has to be caught at or behind the line of scrimmage, and you just have the wide receiver block all the way on that. And Morlock just drifted. That's on him. So, yeah, I do think, given the OPIs the first couple weeks, that it's good to go through a little bit of that in one of the periods, maybe indie periods this week. But this one was not that. This one was just a lack of attention to detail from the tight end. He's got to stay flat down the line of scrimmage so that is not OPI. That's the point. Anyway, next one. Jez Taylor says, we know that Norvell wants to use 12 personnel. What should the counter be if the defense loads the box and makes it hard to throw over the middle because the two tight ends set? I know the first response would be to take the one-on-ones outside, but what would the second pitch be if that's not working? Well, first of all, I don't think that if you've got Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson, that the one-on-ones are just going to stop working. You're gonna have one of those guys. If he's gonna get a one-on-one, if both have one-on-ones, one of those guys is gonna win, and you take that win. Now, you need to be varied in how you do it. They need to have some two-way goes. You need to run slants. You need to run goes. You need to run back shoulder. You need to run some digs. There are a lot of things that you can do with that. Some of the things in 12 personnel that you can do, and again, what they're doing with this 12 personnel, one of the things they like about it is that they can put both guys in the slot. They can put one guy in the slot, one guy, in sort of a sniffer or inline position. There's a variety of things that they can do. But you start to vary some of that. If you're going to have both guys in the box and they're just loading the box there because of that, and then you've got your two outside receivers, with those being your two outside receivers, you actually feel really good about it. I think you can start to do some post-climb stuff where one guy goes on a post route and the other is coming across the field on a climb or deep crossing route. And you can have the tight ends do a couple of different things off of that. So, you might have one of them on a shallow across the field and the other one, sort of set up as a hank route, as an outlet, that sort of thing. There's a variety of different things you can do with that, but there's not much reason why a defense that's loading the box is going to take away throws downfield between the numbers or between the hashes. You still should be able to get that from those looks, especially if your tight ends are good receivers and are fluid players, and Florida State has those. So you just have to be able to actually complete those passes when you get those opportunities. Now, I do think also, though, that the bigger factor here is when teams are loading the box, I think they're not getting quite as much quality blocking from one in particular. I don't think Morlock is doing a great job, in the box as a blocker right now. So I think at that point, if you're going to do that stuff and let them load the box and you still think you're going to be able to run the ball against those looks, then you're going to need to be able to do some quarterback run game. And you're also going to need to probably have Marquiston Douglas out there a good bit more as that second tight end. So yeah. Anyway, next question. It's from James. Cursory rewatching. Knowles at safety seems to be in over his head, mainly the physicality required. Oh, how I miss Jamie. Do we ride with Knowles, with Kevin Knowles, because overall experience, or say screw it and go through the growing pains with the talented freshman? Ooh boy, you were reading my mail in the first part of this. And my conclusions as I was going through the film breakdown. But yeah, I think, first of all, you can't know unless you've seen these guys in practice. So if all your talented freshmen are just busting a bunch in practice and doing stuff that's going to give up touchdowns over their head in practice, then you got to stick with Knowles. You have to. But if you're getting close to the same overall level in practice from the younger guy, I think at this point, you really seriously need to give a guy like Hussey some reps and see if maybe he can take that opportunity away, take that role away. So going back to the off season, I just really wish that ultimately they had moved Azaria Thomas, and look, he's played great at corner when he's been in there at corner. I pushed during the off season because of this lack of safety depth. I mean, I talked about this. I spent like a full episode on this, on why I thought they should seriously look at Azaria Thomas as moving him to safety, potentially as a starter at safety, just so that they can get their best 5 defensive backs on the field. Because I think having him out there, not as a dime player, which he's done well in that role, but as a safety in Knowles' role, I think he's just a much better player. And this defense is any quarters coverage based defense, and they run the base coverage that they run, that Fuller runs, is cover 7. And when you're running cover 7, which is a quarters family, it's a match quarters, it's quarters family coverage, your safeties have to do a lot. There's a whole lot of responsibility on your safeties. And the thing is, they've got to be really good in coverage. They've got to be great in communication. They've got to be reliable in terms of zone type stuff, in terms of matching up. And then they've got to be outstanding in terms of tackling and run support. And it's that last part that I think Knowles is just not equipped to handle. He's just not big enough. That's part of it. Whereas I think Azaria is excellent at all of that. So I just think they moved the wrong guy there. I was wait and see once they put Knowles there, but I'm now convinced more than ever that was the case. And they should have put Azaria there regardless of feelings. I think they'd be a better football team if they basically sold Azaria on making the same move that Jalen Ramsey did when Jalen Ramsey was waiting on an outside corner starting spot. And then you move Azaria back to outside corner next year and let him ball out there just like Jalen did at Florida State. I mean, I think that's what you have to do, but it's too late for that at this point. So all that said, ideally you get Dent back. I'm not optimistic about that coming into the Clemson game. And if you don't have him back, I think you really have to have one of the freshmen. And I think that would be Hussey. I think that would be Hussey, who would have to be most likely that guy. And I think you need to have him ready to go. Yeah. Last one here. This is from Bert. I totally agree with everything you said about Trayshawn Ward in the Hot Takes podcast. It was evident that we missed him in the LSU game and evident again yesterday. You've said for a while that you want Hill to be the number 2 running back and get more carries. Agreed, but why aren't they featuring him more as the number 2 running back? They clearly trusted Trayshawn more than they currently trust Hill. Yeah, I think that's true. And I'm frustrated actually by the running back usage so far. Very frustrated. I think that's one of the things that slowed this offense down the most. I think personnel decisions at tight end and at running back have negatively impacted the running game all year so far. And that goes all the way back to the LSU game. And, I think a part of this is that it's evident that they like Toafili at running back a lot more than I do, frankly. And, I've heard for a couple of years now that they really, really like Toafili. And this is nothing against Toafili. I think he's a really good football player and, great guy and great teammate from all I understand. But as I understand it, from what I was told, before they actually got Benson, my understanding was that the plan was for Toafili to basically be stepping into that role as one of the featured guys along with Treshaun Ward. And then they got Benson and he kind of took the third role. And then once Ward went out, that second role has basically gone to Toafili instead of one of the other guys. And I think that's a mistake. I think they're wrong about that usage. And I think Toafili is more of a slot receiver than he is a running back. I think he's a third down back and more of a gadget player than he is a true running back. And, the thing is, what I do know is Norvell really likes players that create mismatches. You see that with Morlock. You see that with Toafili. He's going to typically favor guys in his offense that create potential mismatches. So you get a guy like Toafili out there, and he's going to create mismatches in the passing game for linebackers and potentially even safeties. He's a problem in that respect. But my issue there is that he is, I just don't think he is the consistent, true feel of a running back that you get from, say, a Keziah Holmes or a Rodney Hill. And I think, for my money, I would like to see the number 2 rushing carries, your first and second down stuff, going much more to Hill. And I'd like to see Keziah Holmes a little bit at this point, in addition to Benson. And I think you really need to treat Toafili more as a third down guy or a long yardage guy and use him more situationally. And this is something where, this is just a place where I think I am on a different page from the coaching staff and from Norvell. And look, Norvell knows a lot more football than I do. Doesn't mean he's always right, but he does know a lot more football than I do. And he's typically right on a lot of this stuff. I mean, you look at his track record on this stuff and he's got reasons for what he does. Just again, my preference, my decision on this would be a little different. But I do think that the primary reason that you're seeing less Hill and you haven't really seen Keziah Holmes yet is just because they want Toafili to be in that role. And I just don't think he's going to be as efficient or effective in that role as Treshaun Ward was, because Ward was a true natural running back. And I think Hill is closer to that. And I think Keziah Holmes is also closer to that. And CJ Campbell, frankly, is closer to that. I think any of those 3 guys I'd rather see as the first and second down change of pace with Benson compared to Toafili. But we'll see if they end up making that call. They've typically been really good on self-scout, and it turned out that when they did get Benson, they said, oh, well, that guy's going to actually take that role, even though we'd initially planned for that to be Toafili. So you just don't know what's going to happen. But I think that's where things are and why things are the way that they are at this point. I do hope, I think you're more likely to see success against Clemson if you're dealing with Hill and, maybe Keziah Holmes or somebody like that getting those secondary carries behind Benson. And I do think you're going to have more success if you get a little better blocking on the edge from someone like 89. So we'll see what they end up doing. I do think, again, I can't emphasize this enough. I think once you add Travis's legs to things change pretty significantly. And Clemson defensively is going to know that. So it's going to be a real interesting one coming up this week. But that's all I got for today. We'll go ahead and wrap there. This has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. Thanks for listening. I'd like to thank my advertising partners, EPR Creations, Louis Marquez of Keller Williams Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, Shenandoah Real Estate at shenrealestate.com in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, Garage Makeovers in South Florida, and then, of course, if you have not stopped by the Unconquered Podcast shop at unconqueredpodcast.com, you can buy stickers and all sorts of other gear. Go ahead and do that. Always helps support the podcast.
Thanks also to those supporters over at Patreon, where I post video analysis and field questions for the podcast from supporters. I'm especially grateful to those above the Dynasty level, that is Andrew Garrett, Brian Leininger, Jonathan Kennedy, Lee Caswell, Travis Smith, Tyler Kashishki,
Dave Blair, and Bert Bertoldi.
If you've been enjoying this podcast, please leave a 5-star rating over at Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Post us on social media and tell a friend. This has been the Unconquered Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Staples. Thanks for listening. I made this.